Hey, sadness and loneliness, what's up? It is the Culture Detective here investigating your favorite albums. And from today on, it is going to be my Chinese New Year break, but instead of having fun, relaxing, going on to a vacation, every single student who's studying in 12th grade at this moment have to revise our asses off because of the exam that is about to take place like 2 weeks later. And the bigger exam that's going to take place 66 days later as well. Anyways, today is the perfect day for me to do an album review on another classic album, an album that I just really love and is incredibly important to the music of the world. And of course, this is going to be My Bloody Valentine, Loveless. So My Bloody Valentine is a band from Dublin, Ireland, and this album is released in the year 1991, and it is one of the most important, if not the most important album in shoegaze. Shoegaze being a fusion between dream pop and sort of indie rock and pop rock and noise pop, but they are all mixed together with such noisy, drony production. It just washes all the instrumentals down into a sea of hazy, fuzzy noise, and this is shoegaze. Of course, we get very dense, thick layers of guitars and bass just stacked on top of one another and all going together in full blast, and it sounds super noisy and it's all melting with one another. And then we get the drums, which are usually also melted inside the layers of guitars and bass, and you can barely hear the percussion. And then we get the vocals, which doesn't quite melt into the instrumentals, but instead they dissipate. They sound like they're in the middle of evaporating or dissipation, and you can barely hear the vocals. They are completely overshadowed by the very dense, thick layers of instrumentals. And looking at this album cover, you really have an idea of what this album is gonna sound like. I mean, the music on this album sounds like the album cover itself, where we get an image, a close-up image of a guitar, except it is smothered and obscured by many layers of warm colors of pink, purple, magenta, and it's all stacked on top of one another, melting into one another, and this is what this album sounds like. So the album starts off with Only Shallow, which is a fantastic opening for an album, first of all. We get these very thick layers of guitars, wailing bass, just crying all over the track, and they completely overshadow the vocals, which are incredibly soft and gentle and tender. You can barely hear what she's singing on the track, and the chord progression of this track feels so fresh and dreamy and nostalgic. It is fantastic, and it's tracks like this and on the rest of the album basically that give you the feels because of the chord progression and the layers of intense noise and drone. They just sort of create this atmosphere that is really hard to get, but when you listen to the album, you totally get those feels. It's like an intense summer day where the sun is just incredibly strong and you feel very hot, and then once in a while, you feel this very mellow, cool breeze sort of gliding across your face, but then you get the very intense sunlight shining upon parts of your face and your body, and it just feels conflicting yet beautiful in a sense, and this is what this album sounds like. And then we have the second track, Loomer, which sounds like a volcano erupting. We get these rumbling instrumentals that are so bold in scale and sound. It sounds like a volcano erupting. It sounds like a house or in fact a building crumbling. And there are no drums on this track, but because of that, it just amplifies how visceral and this track sounds. It's super sticky and oily, and it's all melting into one another, and it's also very summery and breezy as well, but ultimately it's just intense noise, but yet it still sounds sweet at a few moments. And then afterwards we get an interlude called Touched, with its miscellaneous sounds, which are also very noisy and cascading into one another. And we have the third chord track, and that is To Hear Knows When. And on this track, the guitar hums are so compressed and layered. It sounds like TV static. And we also get these very wavy, shimmery, bright guitar tones on this track that are just blinking around, and it sounds surreal, and it's just grinding your ears at the same time. It's not gonna be for everyone. The track When You Sleep is easily the most accessible song on the entire album, because this is, I guess, the most straightforward, clear pop song on the album. The melodies on this album, they are incredibly catchy and sticky. When you look at me, oh, I can say anything. Wow. Again, I can barely hear the vocals on this track, so it would be insane of my ears to actually hear the lyrics. So that's all I got. And the guitars on this thing, they're super hooky and sticky and catchy. Bam, bam, it's a fantastic track that I keep going back to. And we also have the track I Only Said afterwards, and it sort of follows a similar blueprint that When You Sleep has, except it feels a little more repetitious with its very sharp bird chirping guitars. And again, it's a very summery, light-hearted pop song, but yet it's smothered and obscured with layers of drone and noise. We have the track Come In Alone, which is a bit more slower and it sounds a little more cumbersome. We get these very gargantuan layers of thick bass, but still, with that being there, the track feels a little sleepier, but then we get the bittersweet tones, which just makes this track very dreamy. It's like we're floating in space in the middle of a sunset scene, and it sounds beautiful. But what's even more beautiful is the next track, Sometimes, which is this very gorgeous and humbling ballad, and it sounds moving and quite emotional actually. And this is the closest track on the entire album where we actually get acoustic guitars, but since the layers of electric guitars on this track completely mask over the acoustic guitars, all we hear are rough scratches of acoustic strings. And then afterwards we have Blown a Wish, where it's also one of the weaker tracks on the album in my opinion. I do really love the icy, glossy guitar drones on this track, even though they're a little repetitious. But still, overall, I don't think the track is as eventful or as strong or as memorable as other tracks on the album. But still, with that being said, I still think the production and the songwriting is pretty fantastic on this track. And then we have the second to last track, What You Want, which is very loud and bright, probably the loudest track on the entire album. And there's this launch to heaven, ascension quality to this track, which I absolutely love. But then we get these layers of vocal harmonies, which are just beautiful. And at the end, we have the track Soon, which has an exciting drum beat as opposed to the completely melted or fainted in the back sort of percussion. We actually get some sharp, exciting, exhilarating drums on this track, which are actually very danceable, but yet there's this finality to the instrumentals on this track, which makes this track the perfect ending for such an album. The bass on this thing are clearer as well, but again, with layers of guitars on top of it, it's hardly distinguishable. And the guitars itself are jumpy, they're skippy, and it just sounds like a really warm and optimistic ending for the album. So yeah, I know this is a very short review. I myself am a little surprised in that this review is relatively short. But yeah, I mean, there isn't much to talk about on this album. The songwriting isn't as versatile as I would like it to be, I guess, but it doesn't even matter because this album puts the sonic properties as its first priority rather than, I guess, lyrics or songwriting or chord progression, even though a lot of the chord progressions on the tracks and the melodies are very sticky and memorable and dreamy and nostalgic, but it's the very thick, dense, drony noise that's just melting into one hazy, fuzzy wall of sounds is what makes this album so fantastic and so iconic. And yeah, I guess this album is not gonna be everyone's cup of tea. A lot of people are not gonna enjoy this album, but for me personally, I think this album is a fantastic one. My favorite track here is Only Shallow, and my least favorite is Blown a Wish. I am giving My Bloody Valentine's Loveless a strong 9, maybe to a 10 out of 10. Yeah, 10. Screw it. Another 10. I'm a generous man. So, yes, have you listened to Loveless from 1 to 10? How much did you rate it? Like if you like it, and subscribe if you want more, and thanks for watching. Also, I will be doing an album review on the latest Algiers album, as well as the posthumous Mac Miller album, as well as Poppy, Selena Gomez, and Halsey very, very soon. Also, I'll do a review of Grimes' new album when it drops. Yay!